Greetings everybody, and welcome to another history of horror. This time I'm concentrating on Amicus Film Productions, the British film company that ran from the early 60s to the late 70s, producing some classic horror, which we're going to look at today. Yes indeed, the company started in the early 60s, basically making cheap musicals and adventure movies, but really came into its own in the mid-60s when they turned their attention to the horror genre. Amicus's movies were very often mistaken for Hammer productions. Very similar style, same genre, and of course similar actors. But they deserve to be at the table of horror under their own name. From 1965, they produced a series of portmanteau horror films, i.e. short stories. And they featured the classic actors, Cushing, Lee, all the usual famous faces, Donald Pleasance. So we're going to have a look at those films. Hello, the wind's picking up. We're going to look at those films today and see what one you like best, because there's a few to choose from and they're all great. First up, there's Dr. Terror's House of Horrors from 1965.
I kill someone by one.
Oh, sorry about that. Let's just get on with the show. Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, 1965, directed by Freddie Francis and written by Milton Subotsky. Stars Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, those old stagers. So the plot is, 5 guys are on a train, a 6th person enters, and he's the mysterious Dr. Shrek, played by Peter Cushing, who goes on to predict their futures, and they all end up in pretty sticky situations. There are 5 stories in this one. There's one about a werewolf, starring Neil McCallan, set in Scotland, which is pretty good. The slightly more memorable Creeping Vine, which features, of all people, Alan Freeman, who was a big DJ in the 60s and 70s. A better segment is Voodoo, featuring Roy Castle as a jazz musician playing gigs in the West Indies. Well, he only goes and steals one of their pieces of music, and that unleashes the curse upon him. So it's quite a good one. Disembodied Hand, starring Christopher Lee, as the 2nd segment. He plays a pompous art critic, and the guy who bears the brunt of his criticism ends up running him over, in which case Lee loses his hand. But then the hand comes back to chase him around, his art studio. It's quite a good one actually. It also features Michael Gough and Isla Blair, of all people. Interesting. The 5th segment is Vampire. So it features Donald Sutherland, and he gets into a typical vampy sort of role. These 5 episodes are all sort of stuck together with a framework. The Dr. Shrek character informs them all that the only way they can avoid a grisly end in their own particular stories is to die themselves, which they're all like, what? And then he reveals that they're all dead already because the train has crashed and they've all perished. So they all come to a bit of a sticky end, but it's a good fun movie. 1965, a great one to get things rolling. Then came Torture Garden in 1967. Torture Garden, made in 1967. Again directed by Freddie Francis, scripted by Robert Bloch. Starring Burgess Meredith, Jack Palance, Michael Ripper, Beverly Adams, Peter Cushing, Maurice Denham, Ursula Howes, Michael Bryant and Barbara Ewing. The score incidentally was by Hammer regulars James Bernard and Don Banks. The movie had 4 stories. The first one, Enoch. A greedy playboy, Michael Bryant, takes advantage of his dying uncle, Maurice Denham, and falls under the spell of a man-eating cat. That's a pretty good one, that one. In Terror Over Hollywood, Hollywood starlet Beverly Adams discovers her co-stars are androids. How about this for a second episode? Mr. Steinway. Couldn't get a more simple storyline. A possessed grand piano, becomes jealous of its owner's new lover and takes revenge. That's about as simple as it can get in horror, isn't it? Oh. The Man Who Collected Poe is quite a decent episode. It stars Jack Palance as a collector of Edgar Allan Poe work. He murders another collector, Peter Cushing, because Cushing wouldn't show him the pinnacle of his collection, which turns out to be Edgar Allan Poe himself. It's a pretty decent effort, actually. Torture Garden. Not one of the best ones, but well worth seeing anyway for a late 60s horror film. Good to see such a good cast involved, an international cast as well. Americans such as Palance and Burgess Meredith. So yeah, it's well worth checking out. Torture Garden. In 1971, there was The House That Dripped Blood. Yes, The House That Dripped Blood. 1971. Directed by Peter Duffield. Distributed by Amicus. And starring Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Nyree Dawn Porter, Denham Elliott and John Pertwee, and featuring the talents of Ingrid Pitt. This is a very, very good film. One of my favourite Amicus movies for sure. It's very fun. That's the biggest thing you can say about it. It's a fun romp. The stories are not too serious. There's a lot of comedy in there. And it's just enjoyable fun. First segment, Method for Murder, stars Denham Elliott as a stressed writer who's moved into the house and he wants to get away and concentrate on his new character, which is a serial killer called Dominic. It turns out that his wife and her boyfriend are out to twist his mind with crazy stuff and drive him mad, and so that they can sort of run off together into the sunset. It's pretty good. Denham Elliott's very good in this. Great fun. And it's a good start with a very, very amusing ending.
Don't touch me! Get away from me!
But I saw him, it was Dominic.
It wasn't Dominic. It was you.
Waxworks is the second story, starring Peter Cushing. Brilliant little story, this. He's a haunted man. He's basically had a fight with his best buddy over a woman. She's dead, and he lives a lonely, sort of regretful lifestyle. So he's moved into this house to try and get away from it and forget and concentrate on his work. His buddy turns up, Neville, played by Joss Ackland, and they reminisce and have some fun, drink some whiskey together, and end up visiting the local waxwork in town. But hidden away in the dark reaches of the place is the perfect image of the woman that they'd fought over, and they both are drawn to this place. But it just so happens that the proprietor is a jealous husband of the waxwork dummy, and it's trouble from then on, as you can imagine. But it's a good little episode. The third story is a funny little tale, starring Christopher Lee as a very cold father who moves into the house, hires a nanny to look after his little kid, played by Chloe Franks.
Come along.
Nairi Dawn Porter plays the tutor, the babysitter. She pops up again in an Amicus film. She's very good, and it seems that the daughter's got a fear of fire, and Christopher Lee's got a fear of her. So something witchy going on. Good one. It's a good one. Check it out. The fourth segment is probably the most entertaining of the four. The Cloak. A fantastic performance by John Pertwee, the then Doctor Who. John is a very pompous actor starring in a horror film. He wants to make a Dracula type movie, vampire film, and he wants everything to look the business, including his costume. So when it comes to getting his cape, he's horrified to see it's some cheap, piece of costume out of a wardrobe. So he insists on having something a bit more realistic. Off he goes down to the local junk shop and comes back with a possessed cape previously owned by a Transylvanian vampire, which obviously when he puts it on, the clock strikes midnight, he becomes that vampire. So it's a really fun episode. Ingrid Pitt turns out to be his co-star, but also his co-vampire, and it's just a great fun one, and probably the best of the bunch. The framework of the film is set around the house, and the guy who rents the house out warns the tenants that the secret is you've got to be the right person to live there. If you've got shall we say character deficiencies, the house will treat you accordingly, which is really harsh actually, because none of them are particularly bad people at all, but they all pretty much come a cropper. So it's one of the best Amicus films. I thoroughly recommend The House That Dripped Blood.
At the stroke of 12, the vampire must feast. But do you believe it?
I only know that I love you.
Amicus Films was set up by Max Rosenberg and Milton Subotsky, and their base was Shepperton Studios in England. In 1972, there was Tales from the Crypt. Yeah, Tales from the Crypt, 1972. Directed by Freddie Francis. This movie of short stories stars Joan Collins, Ian Hendry, Robin Phillips, Richard Green, Nigel Patrick, and the Crypt Master is Ralph Richardson. So these people find themselves in this crypt. They don't know why they're there, and they want answers. Ralph Richardson wants to reveal all to them, and he does it individually. Tells each one their story, and it turns out that they're all dead already. The first segment is And All Through the House, and it's a Christmas tale of nastiness. Joan Collins kills her husband on Christmas Eve. She's about to dispose of the body when she hears a radio announcement there's a psycho Santa escaped, and he just so happens to be outside. So it becomes a battle for survival, and Chloe Franks again from the earlier film House That Dripped Blood, she turns up as her daughter, but Mummy will get, you know, she gets comeuppance for her nastiness in this one. Good start to the film. Reflection of Death is the second segment, starring Ian Hendry. Now he wants to leave his wife and run off with his secretary. As they drive off together, they're both involved in a huge car crash. He gets out of the burned car and hitchhikes home. But everyone he comes into contact with looks in horror at him and runs off screaming, and he can't understand why. Well, it turns out he's just a burnt corpse. So, you know, it's an understandable reaction, really. But quite a good episode. Not bad. Poetic Justice. Now this is a good segment. It stars Peter Cushing as old Grimsdyke, an old fella who lives on his own with his pet dogs. No harm to anyone. But the locals, two snobs, father and son, take offence to him. And they want him gone from the area. And they basically carry out a hate campaign to totally destroy the guy's character. Loses his job, turns all the parents who used to send their kids to see him, to see the dogs, and they make him out to be some sort of child molester. So he ends up killing himself in, you know, in a total act of depression. And well, it wouldn't be right if he didn't come back and haunt them, would it? So that's his motivation from then on, to get revenge on these two toffs. Good episode. The next instalment was Wish You Were Here. Basically a variation on the old monkey's paw story. So a woman gets 3 wishes and things go wrong. Her husband gets killed basically, and she wishes him back. He comes back as a corpse. She wishes him gone. That's her wish, is gone. So it's quite a simple story, but quite good fun. Blind Alleys, probably the best of the bunch actually. This is very good. Basically it's set in an old people's home, and the Major is the new governor with his German Shepherd, and he's there to make cuts and run this place on a very low shoestring budget. All the heating's cut off, very few blankets, all the old people there are all freezing and starving, all their food's been cut. He's running it like a, you know, like a swine. And Patrick McGee from Clockwork Orange fame stands up to him, and basically all the old people, they're all blind and disabled, and they all gang up on him and they set up a trap, and it's some trap. Check it out, people. It's a great episode. I'm not going to tell you any more than that because it is a beaut. Check it out.
But how can we? Where are we?
In a place where people go who have died without repentance. You see, I wasn't warning you, but telling you why you are here for all eternity.
In 1972, there was Asylum. Yes, Asylum. 1972, directed by Roy Ward Baker, produced by Milton Subotsky. This is set in an old English mental asylum. Robert Powell plays a doctor overseeing how the place is being run. So he turns up and basically visits the inmates of the asylum and hears their individual stories. Frozen Fear is the first episode. Barbara Parkins plays Bonnie, Sylvia Sims Ruth, and Richard Todd, great actor, plays Walter in this love triangle. Someone's got to go, and it turns out to be his wife. Basically, they plot to get rid of her. They dismember her in the basement and throw her body parts in the fridge But those body parts are not dead. No, they are coming back, and they want revenge. And it's a really funny little romp. Very good little film. The Weird Tailor was the second instalment. Good little cast in this. Barry Morse from Space 1999. He plays a foreign suit maker. Right, he makes suits. Peter Cushing turns up and wants to order a suit. Now it just so happens that Bruno, played by Barry Morse, is skint, and he's going to get turfed out of his house, and he needs the work. So he takes on this job for Cushing to make this suit out of a special material that Cushing supplies. Very strange material. So after making the suit, Cushing turns up, takes it off him, but can't pay. So they end up having a fight, and it just so happens, it turns out that the suit is designed in this special mystical material that's supposed to bring back Peter Cushing's long dead son. Lucy Comes to Stay is the third instalment. Charlotte Rampling crossing swords with Britt Eklund. Britt Eklund's winding her up, saying that she's crazy and all this sort of thing, and she's been in the asylum before. So yeah, it's quite a good one. It's quite a good one. There's not much to it actually. That's pretty much it. But there's she ends up nuts. And possibly the best of the bunch is the last one, Mannequins of Horror, starring the brilliant Herbert Lom as a guy who's in the asylum because he's nuts. He makes all these little toys, these little like robot things, and he believes that these robots can carry his soul. So he sits there all day making these little robots, and obviously he wants revenge on the doctor that's imprisoned him in the asylum, and he sends the little robots out to get the guy. Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one. So Asylum is a decent addition to the portmanteau horror series from Amicus. Very well made. Good soundtrack, as you can hear, and well worth checking out. Vault of Horror followed in 1973. A Vault of Horror from 1973. Good little film. Good little film. 5 people enter a lift in a London tower block, one by one, as it descends down. It reaches the basement where they can't get out. It's stuck. So after a few screams for help, they give up and wait for it to be rescued. So they all sit down and share their stories. And it appears that they've all got a reoccurring nightmare. The film was directed by Roy Ward Baker and was shot on location in Twickenham. The first segment, Midnight Mass. Harold Rogers tracks his sister Donna to a strange village and kills her to claim her share of the family inheritance. After settling down to a post-murder meal at a local restaurant, he discovers the town is a nest of vampires. Very good start. The Neat Job, possibly the best segment of the bunch, stars Terry Thomas as Arthur Critchett, totally OCD guy, wants everything perfect, neat and tidy in his house, and his new wife, his trophy wife, tries to deliver the goods, and she's putting things away, keeping everything tidy. It's not good enough. It's not to Terry's standards, and he kicks right off and drives her desperately round the bend very quickly. So it ends up with her cracking up and taking it out on him. That's the end of Terry. This Trick'll Kill Ya. This is a good little segment. Interesting. Very different. Set in India. starring of all people Kurt Jürgens, the famous German actor who appeared in all those great war movies. He basically sees a rope trick with a flute, and he can't figure out how it works, how this piece of string is coming out of this basket just by on the flute. So he invites the owner back to his hotel for drinks and ends up killing her for the rope trick. And basically the rope trick turns on him and strings him up, which is pretty much deserved. Drawn and Quartered is the final segment. It stars Tom Baker, the future Doctor Who, as a painter in Haiti, but he finds out that his works are being, praised in the art world and sold for mega money, and he's not seeing any of it. So he uses voodoo as a vehicle to take revenge. Basically everyone has told him his work is worthless, but he knows better. So it becomes a simple revenge story, but it's quite a good one, and it's a very good movie, Vault of Horror. Their final instalment was 1974's From Beyond the Grave. From Beyond the Grave, yes, 1974. Produced by Milton Subotsky and directed by Kevin Connor. Based on stories by R. Chetwynd Hayes. It was the last in the anthology series by Amicus, and possibly the best. That's debatable. I think it's probably my equal first. I think House That Dripped Blood is just as good in my opinion. They're my two favourites, I would say. But this is a great one. This is a great one. Probably the first one I ever saw, to be fair, as a kid. It starts off with the Gatecrasher segment, starring David Warner. Great actor. He purchases an antique mirror from this antique shop that is owned by Peter Cushing. Now, Peter Cushing will give you the price for the item you want to buy, and he always sets it up so you either pay the right amount or you don't. It's a test of how honest you are, and of course all the people involved fail miserably and they try to undercut him, and as soon as they do that, they're in for a rough ride. So David Warner turns up with this mirror, this mysterious old mirror, sticks it on the side, and within a few nights he notices a figure coming from beyond the mirror. "Feed me blood," the figure tells him, and he must go off into the streets of London picking up young ladies to bring back and murder to satisfy the insatiable bloodlust of the demon within the mirror. So obviously it gets worse and worse and worse, more and more victims pile up until finally the creature manifests itself in front of him, and well, it kills him as well for good measure, and then off it goes into the night. So a good start. An Act of Kindness, another great segment. Stars Ian Bannon as a frustrated, middle-aged, mid-management, bored, trapped in a loveless marriage guy who's bullied by his wife, hated by his kid, and he bumps into Donald Pleasance of all people in the street selling matches and shoelaces. Pleasance is an ex-military veteran and asks him what he does after they get talking, and he says, well, I was in the military as well, and oh, were you, sir? Treats him like an officer, officer and a gentleman, and invites him back for tea. So he thinks, yeah, I may as well. So off he goes. goes round to Donald Pleasant's house and meets his mysterious daughter. Incidentally, his mysterious daughter was played by Donald Pleasant's daughter, and she's really good in it, actually, really creepy. So this little love thing starts off, and it goes very weird, and basically she wants to bump off all his family and run off with him. So yeah, it all goes downhill badly. So it's a great little segment. Check it out. And like I say, the performances are great. The Elemental, possibly the most fun of the movie segments, but with the biggest, nastiest twist. It's got a really nasty twist. Ian Carmichael plays a rather pompous businessman on his way home on the train. He's reading his paper, and a rather eccentric old lady bursts in, sits next to him, and he's horrified, like, you know, who are you? And she says, oh, I'm Madame Orloff. I've got special psychic powers, and I see you've got an elemental on your shoulder. And he's, hey, what? On my shoulder? Been feeling pain? Yeah, I have actually, it's a bit stiff. Anyway, she says, there's my card. If you have any problems with it, it's an evil demon sat on your shoulder. Give me a call. Anyway, cut a long story short, his wife, played by Margaret Leighton, convinces him, after she gets strangled, to call Madame Orloff to sort this little demon out. So in she comes, trashes the place, but gets rid of the demon, or so we think. And there's a nasty twist at the end. Check it out. The final segment is The Door. Good fun, this one. Ian Ogilvy and his wife Leslie Ann Down basically go into the shop and buy a door, an old ancient door, which they want to sit in their closet just to make it look cool. Well, it just so happens that there's a room behind this door, and every now and again the door opens and reveals itself. There's a blue room, and it contains a ghostly guy from the 18th century who tries to draw souls into the room. So it all kicks off. Leslie Ann Down's nearly taken away. Ian Ogilvy saves her, and they are the only characters in the film to survive. Why? Because they paid the correct price. They were honest. They survived because they paid up. All the others ripped off Peter Cushing, and they all paid the penalty. So ends the movie. The framework story obviously is the shop and Peter Cushing, and the film ends with some robber trying to get in and steal off him, and you realise that Peter Cushing isn't quite so human. He's quite indestructible, and the thief, you know, comes to a sticky end. So it's one of the best ones. Check them all out. There's 6 awesome movies there. Amicus at its best. Portmanteau horror. The segmented short stories that we all saw when we were kids growing up. They're classics. Check them out.
Hi, customers. Come in. Come in. I'm sure I have the very thing to tempt you. Lots of bargains. All tastes catered for. Oh, and a big novelty surprise goes with every purchase. Do come in. Anytime. I'm always open.
In fact, 74's From Beyond the Grave turned out to be their last portmanteau horror film. Fitting way to go out. By the end of the 70s, they went more into science fiction, fantasy, with the land that time forgot, people that time forgot, at the Earth's core. And by 1977, they were done. Subotsky went on to try and make other films in a similar manner. The Uncanny was one, starring Peter Cushing, and 1980's The Monster Club, neither with the level of success that the earlier films had captured. Well, that's it. That's us done for another day. Let's get on before it gets too dark.